It's going to have to be a mistrial. Hello, welcome to Dangerous Policy, a channel aimed at intelligent people wanting to discuss important issues facing life and society. My name is Crispin, and today I want to discuss Derek Chauvin, the accused and now convicted police officer in the George Floyd case. It's going to have to be a mistrial. When I saw the footage, like everyone else around the world, of Chauvin's knee on the neck of George Floyd, I was hurt and outraged and wanting to see justice served. But when I witnessed the trial and the overwhelming presentation of evidence showing that what we saw in the footage does not reflect what actually happened, I have gone 180 degrees. I was certain that Derek Chauvin was going to be acquitted on all charges. I was incredibly surprised when he was convicted. And that gave me pause. I was going to make this video much sooner. I was expecting Chauvin to be acquitted. There would be riots and violence and outrage. And I would make a video explaining why Chauvin had been acquitted to try and fill the gap left by the television networks. Because every single news outlet would report only when something looks slightly negative for Derek Chauvin. But in actual fact, over the course of a 3-week trial, the prosecution's case dissolved over and over again. But then he was convicted. So I thought, I must be wrong. The jury was there for the 3-week period. I only saw what I saw. So maybe there were things that I missed. Maybe I didn't have the full story. And thus, perhaps Derek Chauvin was indeed guilty beyond all reasonable doubt, and the jury, having seen all of the evidence and giving it its due weight, came to the right conclusion. So I was reluctant to make this video. But a few things have happened since the conviction, which means that this has been totally upended. First of all, the alternate juror. So when you have a jury of 12 peers, they have some backup jurors in case someone gets sick, gets pandemic or is kicked off for whatever reason. So they don't have to start the trial again. There's someone there that can fill that spot who has seen all of the evidence. And that person came forward after the trial and said, look, I'm so glad I don't have to cast a verdict because I was terrified. There was mobs. There was people calling for violence. Every person on the political spectrum was, doxing us. And thus, I was terrified for my life if I had to actually serve on this jury, particularly if I had to give a verdict of not guilty. And then another juror, an actual juror by the name of Brandon Mitchell, came on a podcast.
We're talking to Brandon Mitchell. He was juror number 52 in the Derek Chauvin murder trial. Brandon, before we wrap, many people don't like jury duty and probably wouldn't respond to the letter that you get in the mail. So what message would you leave to those about saying yes to jury duty?
I mean, it's important. If we want to see some change, we want to see some things going differently, we got to get out there and get into these avenues and get in these rooms to try to spark some change. And that's jury duty is one of the things. Jury duty, voting, all of those things are things we got to do.
And said that if you wish to be making change in society, you have to be an activist and get on these juries, i.e. he became a juror to advance his social cause, not to dispassionately administer justice. Now, someone might read into that and say, oh, look, maybe he misspoke. Well, an image has emerged of Mr. Mitchell wearing a BLM hat and t-shirt that says, "Get your knee off our necks." He went to a rally to protest. This is months before George Floyd's trial. He was asked point blank before the trial if he had participated in any of these protests, if he had been in any form of activism in this way, and he answered no on every count. He lied to get on the jury specifically to advance his activist cause. And if you're looking at the image right now, I mean, what can you say? This is not someone who can be serving on a jury of someone accused of police murder. That is just unconscionable. And the fact that he was on there means that it has to be a mistrial. I mean, simple as that. But more than that, other things had happened. So one of the defense witnesses, who was a use of force expert, showing that, the actual hold that Derek Chauvin had George Floyd in, wouldn't have caused asphyxiation. Well, his former house had a pig's head thrown into it and the house covered in blood, merely for being an expert witness for the defense. That's how fever pitch and violent the community was towards anyone who could stand up for actual justice. On top of that, Congresswoman Maxine Waters, before the jury was sequestered at the conclusion of the case, led a mob to the courthouse and said anything less than a guilty verdict of first-degree murder, which wasn't even what he'd been charged with, would be unacceptable and lead to confrontation. Now, I see that as a direct call for violence. Anyone that says that, that's not what she said, bear in mind that what Donald Trump was accused of saying for the January 6th riot was significantly more anodyne than that. Maxine Waters took advantage of the fever pitch anger and made it clear to the jurors that there would be only one acceptable verdict.
We're looking for a guilty verdict.
The judge himself said, look, I recognize she made comments directly relating to this case and was very harsh on her commentary, saying that, look, clearly the defense now had grounds for an appeal should Derek Chauvin be found guilty. So these are the grounds that had already been presented. And then when the jury was sequestered, the President of the United States himself, Joe Biden, came out and said, given the overwhelming weight of evidence, there should only be one verdict. And then even before that, $27 million had been paid out by the state to George Floyd's family for wrongful death. So they had already accepted culpability even before Derek Chauvin had been found guilty, clearly prejudicing the case. And people say, okay, well, this is all just the circumstances of the case. Of course, there were global protests around the world. A lot was going on. There was a lot of politics. That doesn't mean that it was the wrong decision. We all saw that footage. Okay, well, what I'm about to say to you is just facts. It's not saying that Derek Chauvin is innocent or guilty. They're just facts. But you wouldn't have heard this unless you've seen the trial. George Floyd had taken these same drugs one time before in where he was admitted to hospital for an overdose. It's the only other time he had taken those drugs, as testified by his girlfriend. The toxicology report done with the autopsy showed that he had 3 times the lethal dose of fentanyl in his system at the time of death, as trace amounts of methamphetamine. He had an oversized heart and had a serious coronary heart condition that meant that 75% of his aorta had been blocked at the time of his death. He was in his mid to late 40s and was deeply unhealthy. When you see the footage of him saying he can't breathe, Well, in actual fact, he was originally put in the back seat of the police car and said, "I can't breathe, as other footage and testimony showed. And at his request, was taken out of the vehicle and placed in a recovery position on his side, waiting for paramedics to arrive. So him saying, "I can't breathe," wasn't as a result of the knee, but as a consequence of his overdose. When he was crying out for Mama, well, his mother had actually been deceased for 2 years. Mama is the name of his girlfriend, which she said on the stand, who was present at the time. There was also George Floyd's drug dealer, who pleaded the fifth, so he wouldn't incriminate himself on the stand, so he didn't testify. However, the prosecution has the ability to give him immunity. They refused to do so because they didn't want his drug dealer to testify, because had he testified, it is expected that he would have said, as the other evidence had indicated, that what happened was the police showed up, George Floyd took the rest of the drugs that were present all in one go so as that he wouldn't be found with them by the police, and that led to a drug overdose. The autopsy also failed to find any bruising, as would be expected, on George Floyd's neck where the asphyxiation supposedly took place. And an alternative camera body angle showed most of the body weight from Derek Chauvin wasn't on George Floyd's neck, but was actually on the ground with his knee just lightly resting there. Even the prosecuting witnesses, expert witnesses, said that had George Floyd been found in any other circumstance, based on the weight of evidence, the autopsy, the toxicology reports and the like, he would have been found to have died of a drug overdose causing cardiac arrest and not asphyxiation. Now, is this saying that Derek Chauvin should have been found innocent on all charges? That's not what I'm saying. I'm not a juror. I'm not making that call, right? What I am saying is that there is clear, reasonable doubt that an impartial juror would have to take into consideration when forming their decision, and are very likely to have taken a long time of deliberation coming to that conclusion, having asked the judge many questions, reviewed various bits of testimony and evidence, finding where the various precedents and grounds were to come to the appropriate judgment. Instead, they took 8 hours. Basically, they met in the hotel, slept on it overnight, and delivered their verdict in the morning. It was an absurd kind of result in that respect. And now we are finding that the jury itself was either fearful for its life, because if you're an individual who found George Floyd's supposed killer innocent, then the probability of you being doxxed, found, and perhaps killed by an Antifa or BLM activist was unacceptably high, remembering that someone had their house vandalized purely for being an expert witness. And then others were clear activists who were on the jury for the sole purpose of finding Derek Chauvin guilty, not to mention all the circumstances of the politics that were going on in the real world, like I said, with the $27 million payout, with Maxine Waters leading an entire group to the courthouse, to all of the coverage and protests worldwide. Any appropriate process of governance, of the right rule of the judiciary and the independence and of the processes of law would indicate that this has to be a mistrial and redone. And if Derek Chauvin is in fact guilty, then the state should have nothing to fear from a new trial located somewhere well away from Minneapolis, and hopefully being able to thoroughly vet jurors to ensure that they are absolutely impartial and able to weigh evidence in a fair and appropriate way. I've laid all this out for you. Who knows what's going to happen, but I mean, it's such an obvious miscarriage of justice that even if he is guilty of sin, it would require the due process of law, not for him as an individual, although also for that, but also for us as a community. I mean, we are supposed to have a fair application of law without fear or favour, without prejudice or ill will. That's my view. If you found value in this discussion, please hit the like button, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much.